This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1779, Book of the Month Club, The Star Wars. I'm Shane Kelly.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Adam Murdo.
And I'm Chris Eberly.
Every time that music plays, I then want to say, Comic Geek Speak is member-supported and brought to you.
A grant from the Mobile Gas Corporation.
I always want to say it with a very heavy accent. Comic Geek
Speak. I put on my ascot and smoking jacket.
Yeah.
Well,
this is Alistair Comic.
We support. Reading is fundamental.
Outstanding. And of course, viewers like you. And joining us for this Book of the Month Club is, we couldn't have had a better guest for this one. He is part of the Star Joes podcast, Mr. Ryan Drost. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. To quote Mr. Eberly, gentlemen, it is an honor and a privilege to be here.
Welcome.
Well put, sir.
I was doing my best not to laugh at the out loud at the intro that you were doing there. So,
yeah, it's an oldie but a goodie. But every single time, it just brings you back.
Absolutely. No, I'm thrilled to be here. Always happy to talk Star Wars anytime, any day. I was on another Star Wars, actual Star Wars podcast not that long ago. And they said, "You ready to talk Star Wars?" I said, "It could be 4 a.m, and I'm ready to talk Star Wars." So.
and what a version of Star Wars we have to discuss on this episode, as it's not your mom and dad's Star Wars, to say the least.
It's not even really my Star Wars.
No, this is your weird out of touch uncle's Star Wars.
Yeah.
When he gets drunk on Thanksgiving.
Your weird drunk Uncle Lucas, actually, funny enough.
There was one time we had a hankering on the planets.
Oh my God! So yeah, this is the Star Wars. It was originally released under the Dark Horse imprint in the olden times, in the before days of the
back in my time.
before it got gobbled up by Disney and Marvel got the license and all that jazz, and the process. Now you can read all this stuff on Marvel Unlimited because it's all there as part of the legacy Star Wars package, and that's very much where I got to read it.
Which I do like. I think that's a smart move that's able to happen.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to bring my quote unquote Star Wars expert knowledge, this mini series, or however you want, maxi series, I don't know where the mini and maxi cut off at, but it actually was out and being published during the announcement that Dark Horse Star Wars no longer be with Dark Horse. I believe it was around issue 6 of this series.
Wow.
They actually announced that, hey, by the way, we're not going to have Star Wars anymore. So
wow,
that was when that Brian Wood Star Wars series was out as well. Correct?
Yes, that was a great series.
Yep. That was a good series.
Yeah.
Yep.
Love that one.
Yeah. Well, yep. Times have changed, but at least we get to look back on days gone by and what have you. And this is an interesting book.
Yeah, yes, it is.
I mean, for that reason alone, I'm glad you picked this, Shane, because it's.
Oh, I'm very glad.
Yeah,
Well, I didn't pick up the miniseries. I wanted to read it, but I wanted it all in one volume. So I did get a hardback of it, which I would have gotten for probably close to 50% off, if not 50% off, on DCBS whenever it was solicited. But this is the first time I'm reading it. I have not, all these years it's been sitting on the shelf, and I kind of wanted to read it just to see what it was about and see how good or bad it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, we might as well get started then, and we might as well start with you, Shane. So, what'd you think? Initial impressions?
It's bit mediocre. It seems to be a little bit all over the place and not very. It does not flow very well for me. It's a fine story. I like seeing the juxtaposition of characters that I know and how they were supposed to be originally interpreted. And I like some concepts, but I'm also glad that we never saw this version.
Yeah, I actually pretty much agree with you. I was saying a little bit off air before we got started that first drafts exist for a reason. And it's usually to throw every possible idea against the wall and then have your editor say, okay, that's great. So we're trimming about 35 to 40% of that. Also, some of these characters don't make any sense. Some of their interactions don't make any sense. And some of them are just outright weird. So maybe you want to go for a second draft and try to polish things a little bit.
Yeah. And knowing what we know now of the whole universe, some of the designs seem a little bit too convenient for what's been out there in the prequels and whatnot already.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I'm glad I read this. I am definitely glad that I read this. It is in no way near a favorite of mine after reading it, and I can look at it as the what if that it is, and if this movie had been released in this form, it would have died on the vine. I am 100%, in that favor, because pretty much none of the charm of the original Star Wars is there. Some of the flair is there, but it just seems kind of generic overall, and kind of reminds me more of the original Battlestar Galactica series than it does of Star Wars. And it's not what I'm looking for in a Star Wars book for the most part, but still we get to see, where it all came from in some ways. Ryan, love to get your thoughts.
Sure. So you guys are kind of speaking a lot of things that I would think as well. It is, from just a pure story standpoint, you're absolutely right in saying it's mediocre. From a Star Wars fan base, I feel like anyone that is deep into Star Wars should own this, because it takes you down so many rabbit holes. The amount of research I ended up doing while I was reading this was immense, because I would come across names and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that name meant this at a later time, or hey, what does that name mean? Because I don't know if I've ever seen that before. Did they use it again someplace else? Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, that was the situation. Some of the notes I have are things that they obviously still mined certain things from this original script that they're still using today. Like there's things that were used in the Rebels animated series that came from this script, certain names and everything else for certain things. So they're still going back to this original script to kind of pull some things out. They become something completely different, of course, as they should. There was a quote from the writer in one of the back letter pages, which I wish he would have done more. So at the first issue or two, he did a lot of answering and responding to the fans that were writing in. And then that kind of stopped as the issues went on. And I wish he would have continued doing that, because there was so much great knowledge in those letter pages with his responses. But one thing he said that I think is perfect for this comic, he says, it's nostalgia for something you've never seen before. And I thought that was a perfect way to describe this. Like I said, if you're just a lighthearted Star Wars fan, or just a comic fan and you're wanting to read a good story, I would not say this is something to pick up. But if you are a heavy Star Wars fan, I think you need to own this in your collection to kind of see where things went and how they changed and what they became. And like I said, it can take you down so many rabbit holes that you never dreamed possible, just by noticing names and everything else. I only scratched the surface on my second read of this, and I was like, oh, I need to go back and read this again and kind of pick up on certain things I didn't pick up the first time. So
yeah. Murd, what about you?
Well, I thought this was a real treat, actually. I can certainly agree with everything that's been said so far about the relatively low caliber of the storytelling. And yes, it is a rough draft, and there are times when it's painfully obvious that that's what this is, an illustrated rough draft or even plot outline for what would eventually become one of the most popular films of all time. And I definitely see what you were saying, Shane, about the lack of flow in the story. The plot is pretty choppy, it's pretty busy, it's kind of episodic, and it's indicative of Lucas's attempt to cram one too many encomia to beloved genres of serial film entertainment of his youth into one movie, which is why we should be glad that he was able to cram them into 3 or more movies later on instead.
Yeah.
It flowed quite a bit better. And yes, the characterization is definitely... apparently always has been a weak point for Lucas. I mean, just even in this rough draft form, I do give Lucas an A for world building, but characterization, which includes dialogue, of course, is a C at best. Some of the lines uttered by characters in this thing are like prequel trilogy painful, which is not surprising considering that they were written by the same guy, without the professional help he needed to turn out much better dialogue at certain points in the prequel, in the original trilogy. So yeah, it's a little rough, as one would expect from an adaptation of a rough draft of a screenplay. But it's at the very least a fun theme park ride through the mid-'70s 30-year-old psyche of George Lucas. And it's a really fun, fanish intellectual exercise for us, I think, to just go through this story and just cherry pick, to just kind of spot all these different details and concepts that we know from Star Wars that exist in their embryonic form here as almost unrecognizable compared to what we know from the films, and also identify what we've come to think of as quintessential elements of Star Wars, the sine qua non of Star Wars, which are just completely absent from this early draft, and also fun little interesting things that were in this rough draft that are completely absent from the later films. My favorite of these, incidentally, is the Dune Birds, which I'm sure we'll come back to later on. So yeah, it's interesting to me to see all the different elements here that were assembled in different ways to make the movies that we know and love, what got left on the cutting room floor. And just as a devotee of 70s culture in general, I find it very interesting just the difference between 1974 and 1977, not just in George Lucas's own imagination, although it accounts for much of the differences between the two versions of this story that we're getting here between film and rough draft screenplay comic book, but also just the differences in the cultural zeitgeist between mid-'70s and late 70s, which is considerable, which, again, I hope we'll get into more detail about later on. And one parting thought before we move on to the next respondent, which would be Chris, that we must not forget Mike Mayhew's artwork as we move forward here, because I think it's a delight, and it goes a long way to making this adaptation of this rough draft as palatable as it is.
Oh, absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. All right, and speaking of Chris, your thoughts?
Thanks, honey. I went into this really looking forward to reading it, and I went into it having a hunch that I probably wasn't going to be bowled over by the story itself, but I was excited to make the historical contrast with this rough draft, so to speak, and then what we actually got on film. So I went into it from that perspective. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's a particularly great story. I didn't find it particularly compelling. I agree the artwork is the star of the whole package. That aside, though, what really jones me about this was just seeing kind of what Mert was talking about, the seeds of what things that we've come to love, other things that you're glad never got any further, and then just how things were modified or morphed into something else. So I'm really glad, Shane, that you selected this because I've never read it. I mean, I knew it existed, but I never sat down to really give it a shot. And in a way, it was really fun. And I'm really glad Ryan's with us because I have some questions for him about, the I don't know if you call it a treatment or a script that Rinsler was working from.
Yeah, I have some knowledge on that, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. Absolutely.
And by the way, Ryan, you should let the audience know why we're buying your expertise here. What's your story a little bit?
So I have a podcast. I've been doing it for the last 10 years. Some of the inspiration for doing the podcast actually came from Comic Geek Speak. And so I got together with I've been listening to podcasts for a couple years, and then a buddy of mine at work said he was listening to podcasts, and he says, I think we could do one. And it was as simple as that. And then I spoke with a few people that I was Dave Dwanch was somebody that helped me get myself up and running with technology and everything else.
Nice.
I know I talked to Peter and the late, great Jamie D about doing podcasts, and they were both very supportive and very helpful. Came out to Super Show just when we started, and you guys were amazingly awesome with, helping us. I think you guys even mentioned our podcast like shortly after we met you guys, and we got some cool listeners from that. And we've been doing it ever since, and it's called Star Joe's. So we cover all the stuff we grew up with. So it's Star Wars, G.I. Joe, and we say everything in between, because Star Wars is fantasy sci-fi, and G.I. Joe is Earth-based military. So we feel like everything else kind of falls somewhere in between there. So we covered Transformers, Thundercats, He-Man, all that fun stuff. Because it's all still relevant today. There's still stuff out there that keeps coming out. And that's the thing I love about it. And we do have a focus on comics a lot of times. So that's why this was perfect to come out and talk about. We actually covered some of the issues of this way back when it came out. So it was absolutely a treat to hear from you guys and say, hey, would you like to come and talk about this? And like, this is right up my alley. So but yeah, we're 10 years going strong and absolutely love doing the show. I will tell you, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this as well, the best part of doing a podcast, especially for that long, is the friendships that you make from it. So
Absolutely.
Sure.
Never thought that would, I never thought of that as being a benefit from it, but is the best benefit that came out of it. So.
Amen. 100%, man. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad, I'm extra glad to have you on, for this one, just like Chris said, because I mean, there's so much in this, and it's hard to wrap your head around, again, parts that were just thrown out and never touched on again, parts that became part of the extended universe, parts that became, part of the trilogies or anything like that. That's all in this draft, and it's for an 8-issue series. I mean, I really hate to say this because, like, even though it kind of dragged at parts for me, part of me almost wishes that it was 12. Because
it felt a little rushed in places.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. 100%.
And I sometimes wonder, after reading it, if this would have come out back in, like, say, I don't know, 1985 or something, if I would have enjoyed it more right away, because there was less out there that we all have learned in the last 40 years. And that's going from a perspective of things we've learned about George Lucas and his process and how many changes there were. It goes for all of the novels that have come out since then, the prequel movies, now the sequel movies, and there's so much out there that was not part of this. Even though there's some elements in there, it still wasn't out there. It still wasn't watched over and over and critiqued and looked at and picked apart for 40 years. Whereas now that we know where some of these things that present themselves in this book end up, did that jade my opinion at all? Because I'm like, well, it works so much better the way they did it, so I'm glad they did it this way, but it would have been more interesting to see it before we knew where they ended up with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Shane. It's one of those things where when the original trilogy was out, like you said, we were salivating for anything more to come out. And I know those original movies like the back of my hand because I that's all I had. I watched them hundreds and hundreds of times and devoured anything that came out about them. And then we got the prequels, and I started devouring everything about those. Now there's so much coming out, and believe me, I'm grateful for it, but there's so much coming out that it's hard to keep up and really dissect every little nuance. So I'm actually a little bit happy that Disney is like slowing down a little bit, so it gives me a chance to get caught up on things.
Sure. I agree.
Now, was I the only one who got a little bit of a Rogue One feel from the opening, if you want to call it opening stinger of this comic? With the attack on the family and the death and all that jazz. It was kind of hard for me not to think of that, going into it.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know that I thought of it right away like that, but I can see your point in doing that.
Yeah,
I can make that connection.
I guess I just haven't seen Rogue One enough times because that did not remotely occur to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's just sort of like maybe the similar setting and scenario of being attacked and then starting off the story in that way, and then immediately transitioning off into space and then dealing with that. Mind you, I have absolutely no idea whether the Rogue One guys went back to that script and were like, hey, let's take the basic idea of this and transition it off, but. Who the heck knows?
Well, let me ask Ryan this question then, because Ryan, I'm sure you have this book. I have on my lap, The Making of Star Wars.
Right.
I have a digital version of that.
J.W. Rinsler, who wrote this comic.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, what did Lucas actually write? Was it a treatment? Was it an actual screenplay?
Yeah.
And how much is Rinsler extrapolating from what he had in front of him?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I actually found it very interesting that they chose him to write this because he has never, from anything I could find, he's never written a story before. Everything he has written has been the making of this, the making of that. And I was like, that's a very interesting choice to select somebody to adapt a story who's never written a story before. And I think that kind of shows in what we were talking about. But
the mediocrity thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I could offer a hypothesis here, he was the executive editor at Lucas Books, so maybe they just offered him the opportunity to write the thing as kind of a sop to let him, because he had access to the materials.
Right. My other guess is too tied into that, and I totally agree with you, Adam. I think another thing is that he did work closely with Lucas on a lot of things, such as his books that he was doing, because he also did like the making of Indiana Jones and things like that. Because some of the things I kind of read between the lines and some of the notes in the letter pages, it sounded like Lucas gave his okay for them to do this. And I think that might be Rinsler's doing, is that he helped make sure that Lucas would be okay with them doing this if he was the one writing it. So now to answer your question, Chris, Lucas actually did a 10-page treatment without dialogue in May of 1973. So it was just, you could, I guess, look at it as like an outline of where the story was going to go. But he did a complete rough draft of what the story he wanted to do in 1974. And that's what they used for this, was that actual rough draft. So they did not use the treatment. They actually used the rough draft. And at that time, of course, Lucas didn't have any clue that he could be able to do more than one movie, which is why we see everything plus the kitchen sink in that rough draft.
Yeah. Makes sense. So do you think Rinsler put in a bit of his own spin, or do you think he was very faithful to the rough draft he was working from?
From everything he wrote in the letter pages, it sounds like he was very faithful to what was actually in the rough draft, and that it was more so him writing the scenes of where some of these things were taking place, and trying to fill in maybe some of the gaps, which was, like we talked about, a little clunky at times. Where it gets tricky with this comic is Mike Mayhew did put some visual nods to things that for the fans that were not part of the script. So an example of that is at the very beginning of the story, there is in the background a little homage to the Millennium Falcon. You can see a little cockpit in the background there. I think it's on page 2 or something like that. And that was all Mike Mayhew doing that. That was just, he decided to put that in there as a nod. So it becomes very difficult of what was actually in the script and what was Mike Mayhew drawing to kind of appease fans. Like you were talking about, Shane, with some of the vehicles and everything else, looking like vehicles we saw in the prequels or in the original trilogy. They showed, there was an issue 0 that came out, which that was the only issue I couldn't find. I tore through so much and couldn't find that one issue. But that has a lot of the concept art that they did for this miniseries. So they were designing some of the stuff based off of the script. So some of the things some of the preconceived ideas we knew about the movies did make their way into the visuals.
Yeah, unfortunately, that issue 0 is not on Marvel Unlimited. They just start with issue 1.
And issue 0 came out in the middle of the miniseries. So it didn't start with issue 0. Issue 0 came out between issues 4 and 5.
Got it.
To give Mike Mayhew a chance to get caught up.
Fair enough. Okay.
So.
Well, and some of the things talking about that, like you see the Millennium Falcon, like you said, Ryan. Later, there's what looked like ARC 170 ships. I think there's an STAP going through some. Like, there's things like that took me right out, because in my head I'm wondering, well, is that really what was written in the script as far as, or even sketched somewhere that that's what they were going to use? Or is that just making it make more sense for fans to recognize something? And it's okay, but it did take me out of, well, that looks odd because that belongs here.
Well, the other thing I was wondering is how much of this and the style of it they took off of some of the pre-production artwork. The unrealized, unused ideas that were painted that I've seen pictures of.
Well, like C-3PO, for example.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely some Ralph McQuarrie influence.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and they definitely worked with him and used a lot of his early concept art. So they got the okay to use a lot of his designs and everything else. So some of the things that we do know, I agree with you, Shane, that I think things like the STAP vehicles that we see, I don't think were. I think those were solely used because we would be able to recognize them. But things like the Star Destroyers, while very different in this story, the design of them came right out of McQuarrie artwork. So those were in the early designs and stages and everything.
Well, and even some of the character designs that came through in McQuarrie's work were later used on Rebels. So even some of that pulled me out a little bit because I like where they ended up in Rebels versus just seeing them in here.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, not bad. It's just we've looked at this so much over 30 years, 40 years, if you'll go all the way back, that it was a little hard to keep separate while I was reading it.
One contrast I found that was really interesting was, and when you read or watch documentaries, they talked about how when he was filming New Hope, Lucas kept telling the actors, faster, more intense, faster, more intense. And when you watch A New Hope, the pacing of New Hope, it's fast, it's intense, and there's excitement to it. And again, going back to the idea, as Merv was mentioning, of a rough draft versus the final draft. Ian mentioned this as well. This rough draft is so plotting, and that's one of the things that, from a story perspective, took me out of it to a degree. Because, and again, as Shane said, I couldn't help but think about, wow, I'm so glad they jettisoned almost all of this because the finished product was so exciting.
Yeah.
And it just felt like there was so much in this, again, because like you said, he put everything in there and the kitchen sink, that there was a turgid quality to it that really, as a reader, weighed me down at times, especially when the princess and what's-his-face suddenly realized they love each other.
Yes.
That was very rushed.
Which was akin to that devastatingly bad scene in Revenge of the Sith with the balcony scene between Anakin and Amidala. But,
actually, I would compare it to bad anime, where and specifically like bad dubs from like the early 80s, where like suddenly, I hate your face, but wait, I think I also love it.
Yeah.
Well, and it was interesting too. Like there were certain plot points that all of a sudden they were in there, and then they would just drop and disappear, and we never saw them again. Like the Emperor being introduced, and he's speaking out to the troops, and then we never see the Emperor again through the whole rest of the series.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that struck me so much about this initial draft, as a contrast to what we got on the screen, was I found the Emperor and Vader so colossally underwhelming.
Oh yeah.
That there was just no sense of threat. I just felt like I was dealing with, third-rate tin pot like fascist dictators. Like it was the grandeur and mythos of those villains just was totally absent in this initial draft.
Yeah, to create the Vader we got on screen, Lucas had to compress 4 different characters from this rough draft into one.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for that matter, the mask of the Sith that gets killed in the first couple of pages, I would have loved to have seen on Vader. Like that for me was like the biggest cock tease of everything. Was that that masked figure is on the cover of this first issue.
That's right.
And then we never see anyone look like that again. And I don't know. I thought that was one of the coolest designs in the whole damn thing.
And Vader's not a Sith in this, correct? Vader's not a Sith, correct?
Correct.
He's not.
He's just a general.
Yeah.
Because when he's giving that ham-handed speech to the troops and he has the helmet on but no mask, and it was like listening to Franco in Spain in like 1937 or something. Like it was like, come on, like this.
Well, even Valorum, who is the Sith, and obviously that name was used later in the prequels for Chancellor Valorum. Even the Sith wasn't the Sith that we know in this, because
right.
it was more like a differencing of opinion than a dark side and light side. So
yeah. Especially later when he decided to help rescue the princess, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yep.
You guys were just trying to kill each other, and like in the snap of a finger, like, oh well, let's go get her. What? Okay, wait a minute.
That was a bit weird.
And speaking of killing each other, this is a much more violent version of Star Wars by far I ever saw.
Well, yeah, because the stormtroopers actually hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
I also appreciate just how much the Emperor kind of looks like Sinestro with normal skin color.
Almost normal, a little bit jaundiced. I was picking up tones of yellow peril from him, actually, the little bit we saw of him.
Yeah.
I was getting a bit of Ming the Merciless from him.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was getting, Ming the Merciless.
Yeah.
What did we think of how they addressed the Force in this story?
You mean the force of others?
If I heard that one more time or read that one more time in there, I was going to scream.
Yeah, it's a very clunky line. I'm glad that they trimmed it down to just "May the Force be with you," because "May the Force of others," blah 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 blah. It's just a very clunky, bad written line.
I'm just gonna keep saying that it sounds like bad '80s anime dubbing, because it legitimately sounds like something that was taken verbatim from Japanese and translated, and they didn't bother to actually, spice it up at all. So it just comes out as "May the Force of others be with you."
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, Chris, they never really, in this treatment,
they don't explore the Force
at all. Yeah.
No.
It appears to be just a religious concept here. It doesn't it's not weaponized at all. The Jedi don't seem to be able to use it to read minds or move objects or anything like that. It's just like the Holy Ghost or something.
Yeah. Yeah, there was no, these aren't the droids you're looking for. I kept waiting as they would run into opposition for somebody to use a Jedi mind trick or something like that, and that just never happened.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of the droids, they're evil Empire droids that just kind of get caught up in going with what's the rebels in this, and all of a sudden they're talking to them like, "Hey, old buddy," and I'm like, "Wait, you just met him like 2 days ago." Or a page and a half ago. What you don't even? I wouldn't even trust these droids. Who knows what they're going to do?
I think there was a scene where General Skywalker said they're dedicated to helping humans, but be careful what you say around them, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But what I found interesting also, Shane, speaking of the droids, was how in this original draft they kind of split C-3PO between the two droids.
Yeah.
R2-D2 is now talking.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm so glad they changed that, because they did the scene in the desert, and they kind of took 3PO's dialogue and split it between the two robots, and it's so much more effective and amusing and charming with the way they did it, of course, in the final film.
It's also good that in the films you can't actually understand R2-D2's dialogue because you can fill in whatever funny lines you can imagine yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you can still get the point across from how he is blipping and shaking and reacting to C-3PO.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the meaning is still there, but you can fill in however you feel he would be responding.
R2 for me is my second favorite character in Star Wars after Yoda. And it's for a number of reasons that R2 is very purposeful. He's really, in all honesty, the reason they survive through the movies. Yeah. If you look at a lot of things, he is the hero. He's the one that saves them each time. And I noticed that reading this was that there was a lot of things that happened by chance and accident in the story, where in the final version of the movie, it was more purposeful. Like them being saved in the trash compactor was more of an accident this time. Whereas in the movie, it's R2 that has to hurry and try to save them. So I appreciate those changes. I can tell you right now that if what we read in this was the R2 we got on the screen, he would not be one of my favorite characters at all. He just was very unlikable. I felt both of them were very unlikable characters. If anything, I ended up liking 3PO more than I liked R2, because R2 just seemed like, I don't know, cold and had a lot of the annoying habits that I found in 3PO in the final version. And I love 3PO, but he gets annoying, and he's supposed to get annoying. That's That's his purpose, to drive everyone else crazy.
Yeah.
I find it interesting too that Lucas, because you hear him talk about it all the time now, was that he wanted to show the movies through the droids' eyes. Those are the characters you follow from the beginning. And in this first draft, obviously that wasn't his thought initially, because we didn't see them right away, and we don't follow them through the journey.
Yeah, one of the things that I love so much about the final version of Star Wars is all the jokes that C-3PO makes about watch your language to R2, and now we can actually hear his language, and and it just takes all the fun out of it.
And Ian, that's a great point you've made there, because I think what's missing for me in this versus the final product was it's not as much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the final movie, which has there's real weight to it and pathos and drama, but there's also so much fun attached to it, and a lot of that is missing in this first draft, which again makes a very interesting contrast. Having said that, though, Ryan, this is a question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
I found the most compelling part of the entire story, the sacrifice of Starkiller.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In the beginning, and my question to you was, because I've always heard about it was going to be Luke Starkiller, but this is a different character. Right.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
so what happened there? There was some kind of change, right?
So they went through as we've kind of talked about, went through many different drafts. So I don't know exactly how many drafts there were, or which draft that changed. But yes, he ended up combining the idea of General Luke Skywalker, who obviously, you can tell from looking at it, and it is in the description, from what I understand of the script, that General Luke Skywalker, becomes that Obi-Wan Kenobi character.
Yeah.
And Anakin becomes the Luke Skywalker character.
Right.
But yeah, much like we were saying with Vader, there's a point where these separate characters just started melding in, because he needed to condense down the storytelling that he was doing. So that's really why that changes. But yeah, the idea all along was that the young character was going to be the Starkiller character. So,
one throwaway art reference before we get further along in the first issue. Did anybody else notice essentially the character model for the human version of Jabba the Hutt right before we get introduced to Vader?
Yes,
that was
great.
That was a good throw in there. Yeah. As for the characters, when we first get Kane, in my head I couldn't help going from Arrested Development, "I'm a monster," when he when he reveals just how little of him is left. I'm sure that's not the reveal that they're exactly going for there, but that's where my brain went.
I'm very curious with the Deke character. So one of the things I actually saw in the letter pages doing the research for this was that the Deke character was kind of obviously at some point turned into like the young Anakin version, because both characters were modeled after Francis Robinson, which was the youngest of the Swiss Family Robinson, which this was a very interesting piece of trivia there. The director for that movie of Swiss Family Robinson was a director by the name of Ken Anakin. So, I found that quite amusing. But I found it interesting because I'm very curious, what point was it that the film studio said you cannot kill a child in the very first moments of the movie, because he gets killed right away, and it felt very appropriate that that Star Wars is now owned by Disney, because there's always that tragedy that opens any Disney movie. So
I was waiting for the reveal that never came. I thought that the kid didn't really die, and that he was going to turn out to be that Sith character that got introduced later on. Because it's Star Wars, so I'm thinking, okay, where's the family reveal? That sort of thing. But nope, didn't happen.
Yep, that's and Star Wars sine qua non I was mentioning earlier. There's no paternity reveal anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of remember on the Star Wars radio dramas, which I think are excellent. If no one's ever heard them and you can get a hold of them, I think they're excellent, especially Star Wars and Empire. But I think in Star Wars alone, when they're kind of going through what would become the pod race in Phantom Menace, I think that there is a Deke character in there that is deciding who he's going to ride with. Is it going to be Luke or Fixer in it? And I'm pretty sure Luke says, well, Deke, you can ride with Fixer then, because he kind of ticked Luke off by what he was saying, mouthing off at Luke. So he went with Fixer, and Luke had somebody else with him as they went through what would be the pod race with land speeders.
You are correct. Looking at Wikipedia, at Wikipedia, that is.
Yes.
Yep. Deke is indeed exactly how you're describing him, Shane.
Excellent. Again, those radio dramas are great. If I like full audio cast things, and they have Mark Hamill and Anthony Daniels for Star Wars and Empire. They have what's his name? Brock Peters as Darth Vader, who played Admiral Cartwright in Star Trek, and then
they played Ben Sisko's father. Yep.
They have a lot of good casting in there, so it's very well done.
And I also find it interesting, like when we were talking earlier about certain things becoming more important or some things becoming less important as the scripts went on. The Aquila, which is the planet that they is their home planet and everything else, that never really appears anywhere else.
No.
It's a planet. It's a Latin word. It's a plural Latin word meaning eagle.
Mm-hmm. Or it could be a genitive Latin word meaning of the eagle.
Yes. The only thing we get close to that later on in the actual Star Wars mythos is the Aqualish species, which is what Ponda Baba, the walrus man from the Cantina, is from. But that's the only thing close to the Aquila that we see in this story.
And Kane is also in many ways the what later became the Darth Vader archetype with the destruction of his body, and even some of the visual cues that they put in there of like that's definitely Vader's box on his body there. So interesting, yet again, parts of characters that wound up being combined and changed in later drafts.
Yeah, and we have Alderaan being the headquarters for the Empire instead of being the planet that gets blown to smithereens. And it's more of a planet like Cloud City. It's Alderaan's more of a gaseous planet, and the city floats above it, much like Cloud City did in Empire. So,
and going with the religion point that Murd brought up a little while ago, I think calling them the Jedi Bendu, I think lends itself even further to it being more of a religion than being, say, a spiritual or powerful specialness or what have you. Like, it just seems like they're following specific religious ways more than being embodied with a special power of the Force or what have you.
Yeah,
I found also as we talk about these early issues, and again, you saw the progression when they got to the final movie, but I didn't feel the weight or menace of the Empire particularly, and nor were the stakes for, I guess we'll call them the opposition, the rebels, that compelling to me either. Like you guys said, and this is very typical for a rough draft, there were too many characters. So, and like who was I already forgot his name, the guy who sacrificed himself for Leia, who was with them.
Klieg Whitson.
Yeah, who was that?
So it's interesting with him and how that character evolved because I actually liked a lot of moments with him. I thought he was a very interesting character, especially.
I did too. Yeah.
I think maybe some of it is because I didn't know who that character was.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But so the name of that character evolved and went into two different directions. So one is the first name of Klieg, Cliegg. Became Klieg Lars, which is the father of Owen Lars, and then the Whitson became Whiteson, which is the surname of Beru, who married Owen. So it was Beru, Whiteson, Lars. So that's where that character's name kind of split off and still became part of the mythos.
Yeah. What I liked about him is that he seemed like he was a more sort of worldly experienced character. Yeah, and I liked how what the heck is the young guy's name? The young Jedi. Starkiller's son.
Anakin.
Right. Sorry. Duh. Okay. But when he suddenly realizes at the drop of a hat that he loves the princess and what's going, look, that's not a good idea, and like having a character like that to sort of anchor and balance the more wide-eyed, youthful characters, I thought was a really smart play. And I appreciated his sacrifice in the story, but I also was kind of sad to see him go because I really enjoyed the voice he was bringing to the drama, essentially.
Yeah.
I'd say a little of his DNA went into the film version of Han Solo.
Yeah.
And, coming back to Rogue One again, I think a little more of him might have gone into the character of Cassian Andor in that movie.
Yeah.
Well put, Mark. Well put.
Yeah.
Well, and Chris, you talked about the ineffectiveness of the Empire in this.
Yeah.
The lack of threat. It's kind of how I feel about the Trade Federation through Phantom Menace. I mean, they're there, but you're talking about outer space where there's 360 degrees to approach a planet, and they're worried about a blockade from a couple round ships in one part over top of one planet. Well, what about the whole rest of the radius that you could attack it from or get to in and out? I know that they had it somewhat more surrounded in that way, but it just the way they talked in the beginning of that movie is very much how I felt about this when they're discussing what they're trying to accomplish. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you kind of ineffective here.
Well, that and the contrast between the Death Star and what do they call this thing? Like they call it like
The fortress.
the fortress,
Space Fortress.
the space fortress, right? And it can't blow up planets.
Right.
So there's, I mean, they did kill the king and his entourage.
Sure,
but it just
not
again,
as
it just didn't have the weight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kept waiting for a line like, "That's no meteor" or something like that.
Well, and I found it interesting too that there was a lot more military direction in this one. A lot of terms as far as like tactical approaches and stuff like that, and you could really see Lucas's being influenced by World War II. Influences that we know that he had when he wrote it. And
well, sure, like the scenes where Luke is in the command and control, absolutely, like he's trying to organize the defense. And yeah, I mean, as we all know, Lucas in his first cut of the film inserted Battle of Britain footage.
Yep.
So yeah, World War II has a massive influence on every facet of Star Wars.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I found very disappointing, and I'm probably the thing I'm most grateful that they changed, was the role of Leia.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
She is such a insignificant and very much the damsel in distress in this.
Yep.
Yeah.
That it was very disappointing to read that. But then I was like, it made me appreciate so much more that Lucas changed it so drastically. One thing that did make me laugh, though, and I don't know if you guys had this pop in your head at all or not, was when Starkiller went to go get her, and she says, you need to get my bags and everything. I immediately thought of Spaceballs.
Oh, sure.
The luggage and everything.
Yep.
Absolutely, Ryan.
Oh man, and going with the pacing. I mean, there's two sequences like not too far apart where the pacing is just so off, and even there's even an art moment where even with how much I love the art here, it just the composition of the panel almost made me wonder if like something was like out of place, like it shouldn't belong there. When we're in that in the command center, and Luke is looking for Anakin. And then all of a sudden, there's that panel of Luke leaning against the girl, and because of the angle on it, it's hard for me to tell whether he's leaning in for a smooch or whether she just collapsed and he's trying to pick her up. And then immediately afterwards, Luke just draws his lightsaber on Anakin out of nowhere, and we get that back and forth, and you are trained well, like. What?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any story sense for it to go that quickly. But then immediately afterwards, with Leia and Anakin, we get just as fast, her resisting against him for what seems to be absolutely no reason. And then the whole bag thing, just, I don't know. It's just pacing is the biggest problem with this comic.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I'm flipping through it, and I know I felt this when I read it, but it's really evident in how we're talking about so many things crammed in. I felt like we're on Hoth, we're on Coruscant, we're on Dagobah, we're on Endor, we're in Cloud City, and we're on Alderaan. I feel like we crammed every single planet we've seen through the movies all into one issue arc, and I'm like, oh my god! I mean, they're really hopping around here to different places.
Yep.
Yeah, heck, they were on Kashyyyk, Yavin 4, and Endor all at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we stop talking about Leia, though, can we, lest we forget, also throw in the fact that Anakin straight up punches her out?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if she's the damsel in distress, but a battered woman, too? That would not play.
I think I love
No, not at all.
Which just brings back to like the 1920s, like serials and what have you, nature of this, because it's just maybe that's just part of what Lucas was drawing off of and what this comic is drawing off of, how out of place it seems with the concepts and ideas. Like it's almost like silent film era at times. Like that's clearly the inspiration that or one of the inspirations they're going for.
Yeah, I will say there's so many, the Star Wars fanboy in me, though. There was, and Shane, I'm sure you were kind of the same way with certain moments in it, because I know your fandom for it, is like there's those moments where we would see a scene and I'm like, and it would just be exactly what ended up in the final version. So like the Gordon spaceport, which eventually became the Mos Eisley spaceport.
Yep.
And we're seeing them standing on top of that cliff, and I just got like the Star Wars chills when I saw that scene. I loved it. Or when they walked into the cantina, I was like, "Oh yes, the cantina! This is awesome!" So
Yep. There's definitely some things that, if it was truly in the original draft that they drew from, they did not change much, and just made it, when you turn the page and you see it, just get kind of that warm, fuzzy, happy feeling about, okay, well, this is definitely in my wheelhouse as to where it should be.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't think
go ahead, Ian.
Oh no, I was just going to say I don't think the squadron would have been called the Devil Squadron in the actual movie. I think that also would have been another thing that standards and practices or what have you would have been like, can you change the name to something else?
One thing that was interesting with that, and this also came from the letter page, is that the cross symbols for the Devil Squadron was actually right from the original script, that Lucas specifically described what the cross symbol would look like.
Oh, wow.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, they probably would have gone with Oni Squadron because, again, as you pointed out several times, Ian, a lot of this feels so much like badly translated, badly dubbed anime. Well, one of Lucas's many influences here is Japanese culture, so I believe he was probably thinking of Oni as the name for those things in the first place, and went with Devil Squadron instead because it's like roughly the English equivalent.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Talking of Japanese things, I might as well point out here that one of the many things that Lucas was gene splicing into this script was one of the major influences was Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress.
Oh, yes.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so here we have underneath the Palace of Light on the planet Aquila a hidden fortress deep underground.
Yeah.
Plot of that movie, for the record, involved a general and a princess traveling incognito, accompanied by a couple of bickering peasants who become droids.
Yeah. And then I'm very glad that they took the two little brothers of Leia completely out of it. Even though one of them was named Biggs, obviously became a character later.
Sure.
But I think that was another element that just I'm so grateful was completely taken out, because it could have just been a fragile object just as much as two little boys.
Especially once they were encased in backpacks.
Yes. Just like carbonite.
Perfect hibernation.
Yep. That was a little strange.
Well, like you said, they were there to create tension because they had to save them because one of their power packs was going to degenerate and they wouldn't be able to die and so forth. Yeah. But that leads me to my next question/point is, how do we react to this version of Han Solo?
It was very hard to get used to because it's not anywhere. To me, that character is the most different from what we got.
Yeah. My note for him was that he's 90s version of Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Showed from Marvel's Starjammers, but with an Alec Holland nose job.
Yes.
Also, the fact that he's almost entirely lacking in personality, whereas Harrison Ford's version had buckets of it.
Oh my god!
But at the very least, he would have made a cool action figure.
Sure.
Very true.
I'm glad that one of the stylistic choices of this comic is that I feel like they didn't really do likenesses. Nobody really feels like they were drawn from specific actors or actresses.
Yeah, no.
Because I would have been thinking the entire time, like, oh, this is who they would have cast, or ooh, that, that's what would have happened here, or so on and so forth. And I'm glad that they distanced themselves from that, even with the main characters, because that would have actually taken me further away from the comic, I think.
Yeah. And I will say, even though Han was very different, I still got excited when Han met Chewie. Like, that still put a smile on my face.
They could talk to each other.
Yes.
In any reality, apparently Han Solo speaks Wookiee.
I also loved how the Wookiees almost magically learned how to fly fighter craft with just
that was extremely silly.
So the thing I liked with that was because obviously Lucas at some point just decided, you know what, we're just going to make it that the Wookiees already know how to do this stuff. We're not going to have to train them in a day or anything like that. But another transition that happened when it came to the Wookiees was Chewbacca's father was named, I'm butchering these names up, I'm sure, but it's Azutuk, which in Wookiee language, which is Shuruk, means the liberated one. Well, that name Azutuk eventually became the name for an anti-slaver gunship, which we first see in Rebels, the animated series Rebels. And Black Chrysanthemum, which is the Wookiee character that we see in the Dr. Aphra comics, he actually flies an Azutuk.
Oh, cool.
So that name makes it, like I said, there's stuff that they're still mining from this original script that they're using today. So
that is so damn cool.
Yeah. And I'd love to sit in on something and see how they come up with it. Like, where are they getting that? They must have heard about it, or what are they being given to pull from that's what they end up choosing? Like, there has to be some interesting conversations around that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I also loved the scene. It was later in the series, and again, I don't know what was in the actual script. I almost wish that there was a version of this that came out that was like what they do nowadays with the director's cut, where you can see the actual script that they used. But there was a mini scene there with where we got to see the bounty hunters. We got to see Forlom, and there was an orange version of Boba Fett, and there was a Trandoshan there, which is like Bosk, and then there was the one character that kind of, at least in the one scene, kind of looked like Dengar. So I was like, okay, we got most of the bounty hunters here too.
Yep, I agree.
The scene on the desert where we first meet Prince Valorum, and he's talking with General Vader. The Mortal Kombat fan in me, immediately my brain went to, so they somehow fit Sub-Zero and Kano into this comic. That's great. That's some good visual referencing there. I am not a fan. I was just going to say, I'm not a fan of Vader's design in the slightest. I think that Prince Valorum has a much more badass look to him, but yeah, Vader not so much.
Yeah. He's Captain Nazi here. He's just got that Führer-worthy fade cut going on, the scar on the face. He's just kind of the generic crypto-fascist guy.
He's almost got a dark helmet look to him.
Yeah, well, yeah, especially from the back.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and some of what threw me out of that is I'm somewhat rewatching Downton Abbey, and I saw Thomas Barrow in that with the way he has his haircut through that part of the show.
That was the most startling part of this experience, this reading experience, was seeing the Vader of this story versus, obviously what we got in the film. Talk about a journey from the initial concept to, I mean, you think about it. I mean, obviously Darth Vader is the fulcrum of everything in the movies, really.
Yeah.
His history, and talk about it's an amazing departure. Like, just thinking about Lucas's process here.
Yeah, such a shallow character to start off with, and to have the depth that he had and the grandeur that he has. I mean, when he walks into that first scene in Star Wars, it's you know that's the bad guy, like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then later on you find out he's not really a bad guy, that he's much deeper than that. So like you said, a huge change. I wanted to circle back real quick also, you were mentioning, when you mentioned the Wookiees learning how to fly, I also found it very amusing that they all painted the planes. I felt like that was very World War II also. Yeah. And
also, by the way, it also reminded me of Native Americans.
Oh yeah.
Who would also use war paint on their bodies and their horses as well. Because you always think about whether it's the Ewoks or the Wookiees, they always go back to that, the idea of the more primal forest characters fighting against greater technology.
Absolutely, and they've carried that over too into some of the more modern day things. So you have in the Clone Wars animated series, a lot of the gunships there were painted up on the sides and everything by the troops. And then just recently at the end of the Clone Wars, the new episodes that came out, which if you've not watched the last 4 episodes of season 7,
fantastic,
you're completely missing out. Like it is the best Star Wars I have seen in a long, long time.
Wow. Okay.
It's really good.
Yeah, it's epic. I hope they actually put all 4 of those episodes just together and make it just a movie. But in that series, there's because they have so much, the troops have so much respect for Ahsoka, they paint their helmets with her colors. So I love the fact that, like you were saying, Chris, they're very tribal. Those tribal elements play into Star Wars as well. So
it was great to see that theme, like the sort of the theme right at the beginning in this initial draft.
Yeah.
The other thing, I going back, we talked about the desert scenes, and one of us mentioned this earlier. As little as even though I found the Empire overall very underwhelming, I found the stormtroopers far more menacing, and capable. And plus, they were using their own version of lightsabers.
I love the idea of them having lightsabers, laser swords.
Yep. And I remember that being in the Macquarie. I was going to say, I remember that being in the Macquarie art too. Was that they had
absolutely.
Those? Yeah.
It kind of compensated the fact that the leadership of the Empire was so underwhelming that at least these foot soldiers, you felt like they were actually formidable. Whereas in the films, you have Darth Vader, so it's okay for the stormtroopers to be a little bit more in the background and sort of bumbling, but. Like that scene where he's fighting them in the desert with they're on those creatures they're riding. I thought it was one of the most exciting action sequences in the whole story.
Oh yeah,
actually.
Yeah. When they get to that base and they think that it's abandoned, and then they find the bodies hanging, and they're like, well, not quite abandoned, and then they just go to the next scene.
And then they find the stormtroopers waiting for them outside to do the same thing to them.
Yeah.
I think of the one panel where the one, I guess it was one of the leaders of the squadron, said, "My boys need more practice killing Aquilians."
Yeah.
Just... And yes, those creatures are called dune birds, by the way, Chris. And as I mentioned earlier, they're one of my favorite things about this miniseries.
Well, I know your fondness for Star Wars creatures and aliens.
Oh, yes, Chris. And also for my fondness for earthly ratites. And this concept combines the two, and I'm just like a pig in slop reading about them. Prince Banthu and backs, but why couldn't Tatooine have had a few of these guys, really?
Merd, we share the love of Star Wars creatures because some of my favorite things are like I have a giant Rancor that's about 3 feet from me right now. I love the Tauntauns, the Dewbacks, like all these creatures I absolutely love. So yes, I was a big fan of the giant ostrich-like birds that we got to see. I wish we would have seen that somehow used at some point in Star Wars. And there might be somewhere, like maybe like I said, maybe an episode of Clone Wars or something like that I'm not remembering that they did utilize them again. But I would love to see them make an appearance again.
Yep, they are a great creature design. And also liked Biggs's pet Thumper on Yavin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we only got to see him for like 2 pages. That's a great design. It's like a cross between Newfoundland, an alligator, and a caterpillar.
Yeah. I saw little hints of Jabba, what we ended up with for Jabba in that. And again, don't know if that's Mike Mayhew doing that, little nods, or if that was something that was actually in the script of describing that creature.
Yeah.
Yes, we ought to throw a little bit of credit where deserved to a guy named Sean Cook while we're talking about design work here, because and I agree with you, Ryan, that I love the little back matter we get out of the single issues of this miniseries, the letter pages and the responses from J.W. Rinsler. But in the first issue, they hadn't had any letters yet, so they showed a little bit of concept art, and they gave credit to a guy named Sean Cook for having designed some of the stuff that Mayhew was actually drawing in these issues.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that is unfortunately one of the things that did not make it onto Marvel Unlimited, and I'm very upset about that. That we don't get any of the letters pages. The only back matter we get are alternate covers, and that's a shame. I'd really love for them to have just stuck that in there.
There's a little bit more in the hardback where we get some of the covers, but then there's character designs, there's explanations for certain things. Mm-hmm. There's even a short, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 8 pages, maybe 10, 12 pages total of the pitch to do the comic series to show what it could look like. That helped get it underway.
And I think that's the stuff that was in the issue 0 that they released. That at least I wasn't able to locate that in my collection. But I know I have it. It's just a matter of finding it. But I believe that's what was in that issue 0, which I absolutely love that they did. And then that was such a big hit that they did more issue 0s of some of their other series before they finally had to close the door. So
cool. I do like. And again, this could be just completely artist interpretation, but I like a lot of the costumes. I like the way the outfits look, both because some are familiar, like Anakin's when they put the kids in the carbon freeze chambers and strap them on their backs. Anakin's wearing what looks like Luke's Yavin ceremony outfit, and I've always loved that outfit.
I know you love that jacket.
Yeah, the jacket, the black pants, black boots. I just love the way that looks. But I thought it was really, really very well done design-wise. So it kind of looks spacey and futuristic, but kind of familiar in Star Wars, yet still its own thing. Some of the robes are similar, but they're different enough that it is its own outfit in here for a very different reason.
Yeah, Luke is definitely wearing something akin to Han Solo's jacket as well. It just, it has that swagger and that feel to it.
Yeah.
Well, we can't forget the impact on Lucas's imagination of what he was watching as a kid. Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Robin Hood. Swashbucklers. All that. You really see it in those types of outfits.
Yeah.
A point I wanted to make, because Shane mentioned it earlier. I think what took me the most out of this whole story was you have this very powerful beginning where a child is killed by the Sith. And I think about, there's that moment in New Hope, or forgive me, Merge Star Wars, where you're welcome, brother, where Luke comes upon the skeletons of Owen and Beru because the stormtroopers have massacred them and destroyed his home. In that moment, you really realize the stakes of the story and how truly abhorrent the Empire is, what it's capable of. And in this story, at the end, like I think Shane mentioned it, suddenly the other Sith Lord is helping Anakin, and Anakin never thinks, wait a minute, these are the people who killed my brother?
Yeah.
Like that. That's where I really fell out of this story. And I was like, wow, I'm really glad this is not what we got in the film.
And I think Leia even says, him? And it's like, yeah, he's okay. Well, no, wait, why is he just okay? He's really not okay.
Yeah.
I'm not for redemption, but...
He mentions it in passing. It's again one of those things that they only say it really quickly, where he's like, it's your people that killed my brother, and then it was just like, yeah, but this is, and it's like, but he says, yeah, but didn't you kill that person? And he's like, yeah. He says, well, then we're good, and then they just move on from there.
Yeah. You killed this person who I barely knew, who was completely unrelated to me in any way, so we're even. Like,
right.
Yeah. Besties?
Right.
Oh my God.
Ryan, how did you react to that when you read that the first time?
Much like you, I felt like that's like you said, that's such a pivotal moment. I think in the movie, Hamill plays it perfectly.
He does.
Where he's looking away, but he knows he has to look. Like it's one of those moments like he knows he needs to remember this, because he has not yet reached that point of even being slightly trained in the Jedi ways. So for him, it's a moment of, I need to get revenge for what they did, and I need to remember this moment. It becomes a motivation for him, and he really does, like I said, Hamill plays it so perfectly well. For what we read in here, like, you lost your son, and I realized they did a funeral pyre scene and everything else, but there was no, like, we need to do this for Deke. There was no, like, there wasn't even that motivation. I don't need them to say that, but it kind of, you should feel that. Well, taking my son.
In the same way, the death of Cain in this, when he sacrifices himself, so that they can use his Energizer battery to run their ship. I think that was really underplayed. You know, like it's a character that we've at least gotten to know a little bit. And he's the frickin' father of the second lead. And, the way that they're just like, use it, and he dies, and then it's like, hey, well, it was an honorable death. Okay, hey, you guys want to go get a soda? Like, it's...
Yeah. I have in my notes here that Kane Starkiller is ready to die a lot. Because
yes, he is.
Because he's like, he tells his son, you need to go with him because I'm going to die. And then they run into him, and he's so happy to see his dad's alive. And then it's like, here, take my power source because I'm going to die. And it's like, dude, you don't have to die.
Well, and that's something like somewhat what I'm thinking of when I saw that. I can't remember if I had just seen the new Star Trek shorts or the new Star Trek animated series trailer where they're talking about being on a planet and someone got stabbed, and the one character's like, we live on a spaceship. No one's going to die because they got stabbed. I felt like that here. Like, no one's going to die with all this technology and all the things they can do. He's just ripping open his clothes and pulling out his heart and power source, but you could figure out something else to do. There's plenty of, have a droid hook up to him, or I don't know. There just seemed like there could have been another solution for that other than him being angry that, here, use it because I'm going to die.
Well, I think they probably could have come up with something else if Lucas hadn't wanted to declutter his script.
Well, true.
I also think that scene, well, although Ian, and I mean this in a good way, has partially ruined that for me because now I just see Arrested Development every time, which is just fine because that show was amazing. But I found like what I liked about his character, and I mean I'm extrapolating here a bit too, is that he was clearly so worn down and world weary from all that he'd experienced, just decades of warfare, and then the loss of his son. I almost took it as, and you're right, it in a book that was very turgid, that was kind of rushed. But I almost took it as, I really don't want to live anymore, but I at least want to make my death mean something. I'm not just going to go and kill myself for no reason. Right. So that was one of the parts of the story that actually got to me just a little bit. But now, of course, it's Arrested Development, but that's fine.
But like the actual sacrifice is great, and I do agree with you on that, Chris. Yeah. It's just more the reaction to it or lack thereof that's just what takes me out of all of it. And the other part of me can't help but wonder, how the heck did he get the last name Starkiller? Because like that sounds like it has a story behind it. Like, you're not like just given the name Starkiller. Like that's like there has to be a reason why he is Starkiller, and we don't get any inkling of that at all in the story, like tragic backstory or anything like that. Like, so I think that the calling it Starkiller Base, I think, makes a lot more sense than having it be a last name.
Yeah. Well, and you're building up, like you said, to this touching moment where the father does sacrifice. But me being very sappy about fathers and sons, I was all prepared for something, and then it was like, oh, it had to be. I'm like, oh, well, now wait a minute. That was kind of anticlimactic for myself. I expected to be a little bit sadder and tear up a little bit, but no, they're good moving on.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me say something. If Shane wasn't moved by a concept like that, they missed the mark, ladies and gentlemen.
I get it, but I was looking for the next page. I'm going, okay, this is going to be a little heavy. Good. Oh wait, no, I don't even have to tear up. What? All right, they got the droids. They're stuffing kids in their backpacks. All right, well, moving on.
In fairness, think of how much time Luke devoted to mourning Owen and Beru, or even Ben, in the movie.
Yep. Good point. Yeah. Very good point.
Well, but I think there's more anger that took over that than mourning. Mourning would come later for them for that. Like, Luke mourns very much after he loses Ben, in addition to probably thinking about Owen and Beru. There's almost no sadness about it. It's just, well, it had to be.
Yep,
and they just go on.
No time for emotion. The Empire's on their heels. They gotta get to the Ofuki system or whatever.
Yeah,
I guess.
Which that was interesting too. That's another thing I did a deep dive into was the Ofuki system. Later on, it was used as the homeworld of Mace Windu, which I smiled when I saw Mace's name mentioned as one of the pilots in this, as well as Chewie was mentioned as a pilot. But Ofuki was a homeworld of Mace Windu. It was the name originated from the constellation Ophiuchus. Thank you.
It's shaped like a guy holding a snake.
Yes. So I found that interesting. But yeah, they did end up revisiting that, and that's the home world planet of Mace Windu. So.
I also have to go into when our cast and crew try to get aboard the Metro North train to get off of the station that they're on, to try to get away. And like, did they honestly think they were going to get away? Number one,
right? Yeah.
And number two, how easily they got away. It all just happens way too fast, and that's what happens when you have this much story to tell in the amount of time that you have to tell it. Because I mean, each issue is 22 pages or what have you. So like, I mean, I get that they're doing their best to run along, but in no way did I feel like they were ever in danger reading that bit.
Yeah.
But hey, in the end, Chewie gets his medal, and so does R2 and 3PO, which I was very happy to see.
Justice is done.
Yes.
Ryan, I wanted to ask you, what kind of response did this get from fandom when it initially was released?
It actually got a pretty positive response. Again, I think for the casual fans, because my co-host he as much as at the time his name's Chuck, as much as he's a big Star Wars fan, he's also he doesn't do deep dives as much into the characters and everything else. He loves Star Wars. He loves everything about Star Wars, but I'm more the one that gets the reference books and does super deep dives on characters and stories and worlds and everything else. So for him, it was just like he was reading a story and he's like, it's not a very good story. For me, it was like I said, it was something where I could kind of delve more into it. And that was kind of the case for Dark Horse at the time. Was most people getting Star Wars comics from Dark Horse were the diehard fans, because it's not like it is with Marvel now, where it's like, oh, it's the Marvel name, so it's getting picked up a lot more. Dark Horse Star Wars was really for those that loved Star Wars and wanted those expanded universe stories. So the reaction to people reading it was pretty positive, actually, which is why a hardcover was made, and like I think there was even a box set that was done and everything. So.
And interestingly enough, the trade is out of print right now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was there ever a Marvel edition?
I don't think so.
I don't think they have, no.
Yeah, then that would be why. Because I know that some of the legacy stuff has been recollected, but not a lot of it was reprinted. In Marvel editions after the whole Dark Horse thing went down.
Yeah, I'll have to check.
Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I have to check because I think that Marvel did a trade for Infinities, and if there was ever a place that this would have appeared in, it would have been in that trade.
Yeah.
But I'd have to look and see if that's actually in there.
And that's a shame, because I think we can all agree that Dark Horse produced some phenomenal work when they had the license, and such a wide variety. I mean, as you said, deep dive, right? That they explored so many different facets of the Star Wars universe, and I hope we see more and more of that stuff reprinted.
Well, and I think Ryan's right that Dark Horse really was for the more deep dive fan. I mean, you had what was it? Dark Empire came out first, and that was going right after Return of the Jedi, and seeing what happens with Luke and the whole family right afterwards. It was definitely for those more into it fans, ones that wanted the more complete story, or to see what happened with this ancillary character that was in this one scene but really could have a story to him, and Dark Horse delivered on a lot of that stuff. And
tied into exactly what you're saying there, Shane, too, with Dark Horse being more for those fans that needed that expanded universe, they went in a very different direction than Marvel has, and I am not knocking at all what Marvel is doing now, because I love what Marvel's doing.
Yeah, me too.
But they went right from doing the Dark Empire with characters you knew right into Tales of the Jedi, which was completely different, and you knew nothing about any of these characters, but was still immensely embraced by the fans. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the easiest way to get a hold of it right now, outside of paying $40 for the hardcover on Amazon or trying to track it down somewhere on eBay, it runs digitally. It's $14.99 on Comixology itself, But if you want to go off of Amazon, right now it is only $9.97, and you get both a Kindle and a Comixology copy that way. So anybody who doesn't have Marvel Unlimited, that would be the way to get the Star Wars right now in your hands and not pay a pretty penny for it.
Yeah.
L. Levenstein, always clutch, always clutch, my friend.
Thank you.
Oh, I was going to say, I will say, too, as far as feeding into my Star Wars fandom, CGS played a big part into that because I got to meet at Super Show, I got to meet Walt Simonson and Louise Simonson, and I had them autograph, I think it was maybe issue 56, I want to say, of Star Wars. It's in the middle there.
Yes.
And
nice.
They both worked on it, and that was before they were married. So that was an interesting conversation I had with them. And then I got to talk with also Tim Truman at Super Show and had him sign a Dark Horse comic that he was doing with the Tusken Raiders. And he said he told me an awesome story about him working with George, and that George gave him the permission to delve into the culture of the Tusken Raiders, which he had never allowed before. So that was really cool to hear.
I remember the book that I wound up getting them getting signed because I just happened to have it and I knew that they were going to be there. And it came up a couple episodes ago, Murd. My copy of Days of Future Present is signed by both Louise and Walter because I happened to have it on me and they were there, so I made that happen.
It's awesome.
Yep.
Ryan, let me ask you a question. Was Star Wars issue 56 the Marvel series you're referring to, of course,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Is that the one that has Lando on Cloud City?
Yes. Yeah,
okay. Now, right now, I feel such kinship with you. That was one of the first Star Wars comics I ever read.
Oh,
really?
Nice.
And in fact, I was listening 5 years ago. We did a spotlight on Star Wars Marvel comics. And in that episode, I just listened to it again. I talked about how the thrill I had because I was getting comics then at convenience stores. And as we all know, distribution was very spotty. And I actually was able to get that two-part story in succession off the spinner rack at a convenience store, which sometimes was very hard to do. But that is a really fun two-parter. So
yeah.
Kudos to you.
Thank you. And I was right. I looked it up real quick. It was issue 56, so my memory was serving me correct. Yeah, it has Lobot knocking Lando.
Yep. That's it.
Yep.
Since we're pretty much there on the issue, I just really have to just read this. Stay with me. I wanted to thank you. I think I love you. What is this silly talk of love? Stop acting like a child and start behaving like a queen. Like what?
Yeah.
And then like 3
And then
pages
she goes
later,
into hating him.
he's suddenly mooning over her.
Exactly. Yeah. Quick turn.
Well, again, what was hilarious about that for me was I thought, so this is what we got in Revenge of the Sith, basically, the balcony scene. I mean, it's essentially the same really bad dialogue that just takes you right out of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And the corridor that they're going down a couple of pages later certainly looks like it was taken from the Millennium Falcon.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The ship itself looks like the blockade runner.
Yep.
From Star Wars, but the interior looks like the Falcon, all the way down to the gunning posts that we see. Them jump into later.
I do like how the Y-wings seem more massive. That it's a multi-crew ship.
Yeah.
Versus just a single pilot.
Yeah. And the Star Destroyers were like little 2-man zipping around type ships.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't need them because they had the Space Fortress.
Yeah. Which I found interesting. They did almost like the trench run near the beginning of the story, and then they did another one near the end of the story. So,
well,
the Space Fortress also just didn't seem that gigantic to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was big, obviously, but it just maybe because of the name, like Death Star, that was so intimidating and so awe-inspiring. And it's the Space Fortress. I feel like it was kind of in a game of Space Invaders or something like that.
I wonder if a little bit played into it that the fact that it didn't destroy planets played into the fact that it didn't seem as big or as scary. Yeah.
Now, once we get to the next issue, and we get the forest portion because now we went from the desert and now we're in the forest because again we're cramming everything into one movie here. The sacrifice for Whitsom. I mean, we discussed it earlier on in the episode. I think was really well done, but did he really have to scream for freedom? Oh boy.
He had his Braveheart moment. That's all it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His death is the one that hit me hardest out of this whole frickin' thing, and I think it was just because of the way it was done more than anything else. It seemed to actually have impact.
That impact, and the character, as I said, was interesting. Like I wanted to see more of him.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, what do we think about having Uncle Owen in the treehouse there?
That was interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, Ian, how you were having a hard time envisioning who would be cast to play whom if this thing had been made in the mid-'70s like this.
Mm-hmm.
The one casting decision that actually popped into my head right away, for whatever reason, I thought they would have tried to get Gene Hackman to play Owen Lars.
Yes, I could 100% see that.
Great actor.
For all, 74 is the same year he played the old blind hermit in Young Frankenstein, so he was taking care of it.
That's right.
I mean, I can also see just because of his beard. Like I keep trying to think of who would play Luke, and I go between Sean Connery, but a few years later, with a beard like that. But then again, we'd have to deal with the accent, and that would probably muck up the works just for trying to.
It would kind of give me a Highlander vibe too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, at this point, Shane and Merck can attest this. Connery had been in the really bizarre sci-fi film Zardoz.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So we would have gotten probably that vibe. And then in the 80s, he does the very excellent sci-fi film, which is often overlooked, Outland.
I was just thinking about Outland.
Yeah.
What would you think of Charlton Heston?
Oh,
That could work.
That could work, yeah.
Yeah.
Majestic Hambone.
What was Jack Palance doing in 74?
Oh.
That could have been good.
I think he played Dracula at one point in the 70s. I want to say he played Dracula.
Well, he was definitely in an episode of Buck Rogers in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well,
Which Buck Rogers episode was he in?
It's like the second or third one. He plays Khalil, I think.
Oh, wow.
He kind of has powers and is enslaving the people in the planet or the city, and he almost on stage going, "Yes, me, you will follow." Like very flamboyant, very loud, very controlling, but not really menacing. Other than you're afraid he's going to burn you or whatever he did. I'm pretty sure it's Khalil was this character's name.
I'll have to check that.
Murd, in 1975/76, Jack Palance did play Bronk in a cop show called Bronk, where he was Detective Alex Bronkov for 25 episodes.
Wow.
This is a one-off or a series, Ian?
This is a 25-episode one season show called Bronk, Bronk.
I'll tell you, reading this, also one of the things that popped in my mind was that if we had gotten this version on screen, I see it performing as well as like Krull did. Which
Yes.
I love Krull, but I will also objectively state that Krull is not a good movie. But I personally
like that, my friend.
Yeah, I personally love it. But I feel I got very much a vibe that if this was released in this version, it would have been as disjointed as that movie kind of is. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I do get also the Moons of Mongo from the 80s Flash Gordon movie, too.
Oh, yeah.
That's where you appreciate the streamline that Lucas did between this and the final draft. I mean, the streamlining is so important. And again, go back to, it was like a joke among the cast. What was his one direction? Faster, more intense. And, he was right because it really worked in the pacing of the final product.
Yeah, and I will say that's the one thing, and I do love the new movies that have come out, but the one thing with Rogue One that it did for me was it made that faster, more intense, even more so stand out in Star Wars, because after watching Rogue One, I went right into watching Star Wars, and I'm with you, Mert, I will always call it Star Wars. that I went right into Star Wars, and I'm like, okay, this movie now seems even more intense. It seems even more like they got the Empire right on their tails. Like, it just really helped add and enhance that movie for me.
I love Rogue One. I like that movie more and more every time I see it.
I do too.
Yeah. It's a favorite of mine. I'm glad that we're going to get that Disney Plus series eventually that goes even further into some of the backstory.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think when I talk to friends about the franchise, the movies, or whatever, people who are deeper fans of Star Wars, I call it Star Wars. For people who are much more on the surface level, if I just say Star Wars, they're going to start asking which movie. So I say A New Hope to differentiate that, because they don't understand that it's Star Wars.
I didn't see the first Star Wars movie until the special editions were out, because that was the age I was. So to me, it's always been A New Hope, even though I know it was originally just Star Wars. So that's immediately where my brain goes. I see it more as a trilogy than I do as a movie, because
I can still remember my parents. I could even take you to the house that they did this. I can remember my parents dropping my sister off at a friend's house for them to watch her, while they took me to Coventry Mall in Pottstown to the one of two theaters to see Star Wars. And I can remember sitting there with them. I can remember looking one side for my dad and one side for my mom, and I'm sure it was just as the figures were coming out in the re-release in 1978. It was not in 77. Yeah. But I distinctly remember what house they dropped her off at, that we went to the theater to see it, that I kept questioning, why are we dropping my sister off? And then we saw Star Wars, and I could care less because I was so enthralled. Like I wasn't worried about where my sister was anymore.
Well, a similar thing for me was that when I turned 40 a few years back, I was with my parents, and all the memories that I thought, and this was such a wonderful birthday gift from my dad that he didn't even know he was giving to me. All the memories that I thought I had for seeing Empire Strikes Back in the theater with my dad were actually memories from seeing Star Wars. Because I was not even 2 when the first movie came out, so I was not old enough for him to take me to the theater. However, there was a theater near us that the year before, so in '79, they actually did do a re-release of Star Wars. Sure. And he took me then. I was about 3.5, 4 years old at that point, and it was the first movie I went to see with my dad. And I sat in the aisle seat, and there was people dressed up as like Darth Vader and stormtroopers and C-3PO and stuff like that. And I remember sitting in the aisle seat and Darth Vader coming up the aisle, and I had not seen the movie yet, but I knew that was the bad guy, and I was getting very nervous. And my dad's like, "It's okay, it's quite all right." And I was telling my dad this story because I thought it was the story of when he took me to go see Empire Strikes Back, because I would have been old enough then. And he says, "That wasn't Empire Strikes Back." He says, "I took you to go see Star Wars."
Nice.
So the gift my dad gave me was the fact that I have seen every single movie in the movie theater since I was a little boy.
That is
so wow.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm the idiot who didn't see Empire Strikes Back until right before Episode 3 came out.
Oh wow!
Wow!
I somehow saw, I somehow saw the first Star Wars and Jedi in theaters for when they were special editions, and I didn't actually see Empire for the first time until right before Episode 3.
Well, I think I think Murd has a similar tale.
Yes, I was just going to say, and so you and I both saw the episodes out of order.
Yep, indeed.
Like the Star Wars, then Jedi, and then Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
That's something. Yeah, the only one of the original trilogy that I ever actually got a chance to see in the theater back in the day, and it wasn't even the original release, was Return of the Jedi. I got to see that one for my birthday around Christmas time, 1984.
Nice.
But I've seen the original Star Wars many times. My dad taped it off HBO. And I still have that copy, and I still watch it from time to time.
Excellent.
So I've watched that multiple times. I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater, and it was a couple of years after that until I finally got to see. We went to a video store and rented it.
I can remember seeing. I know I saw Star Wars 3 times in the theater. Like I said, once with my mom and dad, and just me. The second time, I forget if my sister was along for that one. The third one, I know she was, because that was during the re-release in '79 We saw it at Limerick drive-through, and as you went in and paid for my dad to pay for the car, they handed him 2 Kenner catalogs for upcoming Empire Strikes Back toys that you would get in the boxed version of vehicles. So that was kind of cool. And then at the end of that viewing of Star Wars, you saw a trailer for Empire. And then my neighbor that lived next to my mom and dad, he took me to go see Return of the Jedi. I don't really know why. He took me to a few movies, just do something fun to do during the summertime. He was retired by then, and that was kind of cool. But yeah, I've seen every single Star Wars movie in the theaters as they were coming out, except Star Wars. I saw that first re-release in '78.
Yep, that was the same for me, and I've even been there for opening night of Phantom Menace in 3D. I even went then.
Oh, wow.
I did go see that, but I didn't see it opening night. But I did see it in the theaters.
What I cherish is, in the contrast in sort of our viewing culture, is that I did see Star Wars in '70s, so my parents brought me when I was 4. But if you loved a movie, you would go see it multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
In the theaters. So, like Empire Strikes Back, I have vivid memories of being taken to see it 3 times.
Yeah.
I was 7. Return of the Jedi, I was 10. I remember we went to a nearby theater in like a large strip mall, and we had to wait online for hours to get in. Because people were so anticipatory. Then we saw that multiple times, and obviously things have changed. Unless you're really plus it's so damn expensive. But it's just fascinating to think about what movie viewing was like back then, especially if you really loved a movie.
Oh yeah,
you wanted to get to that theater as many times as possible. Because then once it left the theater,
it was gone.
Even if you had HBO and cable, I mean, it's going to be not going to come out for quite some time. So
yeah.
We had what was called a disc player. So it was before Laserdisc, before VHS, before Beta, there was a thing called a disc player, and it was like a cartridge type thing about the size of a record album. And you would slide it into the player, and you'd pull it out and just get the casing back, and the movie was in there. And
yes.
And then you would lift up this lever, and it would play the movie, but you'd only see half of the movie. When half of it was over, you had to slide it in, pull it back out, flip it over, slide it in. And I had Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back in that version, and I cannot. And much like a record, they would skip if they were played a little too much. Yeah. And so I had the skipping moments that I still remember.
These are before Laserdiscs?
This was before Laserdisc. This was before VHS or Beta.
Wow. I knew about this because there's a YouTube channel called Techmoan that does like retro. Like they have like a whole thing where they do like retro versions of different media, and this was one of the players that they touched on at one point. And he had to actually go in and fix it himself because the mechanism that dropped the disc in wasn't working right. So I think it took like 3 different players to actually finally get one that worked well enough for him to actually be able to go in and do the history of it and see what it looked like today. But yeah, you're right. It skipped like crazy if there were any sort of scratches.
Yeah. To the point where I love Ghostbusters, and I know you guys are a fan of it as well. The scene where Egon is going down the hallway with the detector, and then he pokes the guy in the hallway. Yeah. And on the disc version of mine, it skipped there, so he moved really fast down the hall. And I always it was like that from the very beginning. So I always thought that was how it was in the movie because I watched that version more times than I saw it in the movie theater only once, but I watched it hundreds of times on that disc player, and I thought that was done for comedic effect. And it wasn't until I got to a VHS version that I realized no, that was just the disc skipping. So
I'm fascinated. How long were these disc players around?
Oh, not long. Not very
long. Yeah. Yeah. But there was whole video stores open where you'd go through them just like record albums. You'd flip through them, and they would have the beautiful artwork on the front. The Drew Struzan artwork for like Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that type of stuff on there. So, I
know we're way off tangent with these. And these are great stories. I love them. I have a DVD of the Laserdisc version of Star Wars Empire and Jedi before there were any special editions, before there were any changes to scenes. So I have on a DVD that Han shoots first and different things that I know I've seen and remember fondly, but you just can't find it anymore like that.
I have that exact same thing.
I have what's called the despecialized edition, which I downloaded, which is essentially a HD copy of as close to the original version as you can possibly get, that they took from multiple like work prints and things like that to try to get it as close as possible and as high a quality as possible. Since we still haven't gotten the originals on Blu-ray.
I can't remember if this Laserdisc version that I have a DVD of, I can't remember if it does or does not have C-3PO talking about all the different fault points of the tractor beam that they have to disable one of them, because the original version had him not speaking there. You just saw all the things flash up, and then they added C-3PO talking later. But I can't remember if this Laserdisc had that or not.
Yeah, I can't remember either. I feel like it does not, but
that's
I could be wrong.
Think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Ryan, let me ask you this question because I love this tangent. Have you heard anything about, now that Disney owns the property, will we see the original versions?
So that rumor pops up at least once a year, if not more. There has been no confirmation of that occurring. My thought is, and this is just my theory, and I don't want to see the gentleman pass, of course. It'll be a very sad day for me. My thought is that could happen once Lucas is no longer with us. I think they're doing it out of respect to him.
Gotcha.
And because my thought also is that Disney is certainly not going to pass up a chance to make some money, and they know that thing would sell like crazy.
Yeah.
So
I have one more quick theater story to touch on before we head back to the conclusion of this book and what have you. My two favorite theater moments from Star Wars are actually both as adults. Because again, I got into Star Wars way later. It's just, the way it happened.
You sexy whippersnapper.
Get on my lawn because I'm younger. Anyway, so 2016, the King's Theater here in Brooklyn reopened. And the King's Theater is one of the Wonder Theaters, which was part of the Lowe's chain back in the day, where it was they were these extravagant movie theaters that had multiple levels to them, and they were essentially almost like Broadway theaters, only they showed movies. It had been left to deteriorate. It sat abandoned for years until eventually the city of New York renovated it and turned it into a concert space. And it's been used that way ever since. And in 2016, the Alamo Drafthouse, before they opened up their Brooklyn location, rented out the King's Theater and showed, they were the special editions because that's all they were allowed to show, but they showed 4, 5, and 6 back to back to back at the King's Theater.
Wow.
And I sat there at a historic movie theater watching for the first time since the place was renovated an actual movie.
Wow.
And
that's awesome.
That's one thing I've never done, is seen Star Wars Empire and Jedi back to back in a theater.
Yeah. It was an experience, especially since it was almost filled to the rafters with Star Wars nerds and everybody, just one of the greatest moments of my life. And the other being when Episode 7 came out, I got to see it at the Ziegfeld at what is called the quote-unquote Star Wars line. And I got to see it opening night there at the Ziegfeld. And then when they closed the Ziegfeld, which unfortunately happened while they were still showing The Force Awakens, I was there on closing night for the Ziegfeld. And I got to see the very last movie run at one of the last remaining single theaters in New York City, and that was an experience. Yeah,
I know Rogue One and Solo don't have the regular Star Wars logo and then the same music, but for all the other chaptered movies, there's nothing like sitting in a theater. You see the Lucasfilm name come up on the screen or however it comes up, and then it's silent, and then bam, and the whole words come out. There's just nothing like seeing that fade off the screen and the crawl come up. There's just nothing like it in my experience watching movies.
You get that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
And you just go crazy for a second.
What'd you say, then, Mark?
you need the Fox fanfare at the beginning.
Oh yeah, yes. I love that now that Disney owns Fox, they've actually put that back in.
Oh, they have
Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. Yeah, when I watch it on Disney, or if I pull it up on my Apple app, it's the whole Fox fanfare in the beginning.
I certainly knew that Disney had acquired 20th Century Fox, but that is an unexpected perk.
Yeah,
I'm 99% sure that's happened.
Yeah, I believe you're right, because I remember there being an article about that. So yeah.
In that same vein, when they did get Star Wars on Disney and all that, they changed it so that Han Solo does kind of shoot first, or at least the same time. They changed that cantina scene again.
Yeah.
Yes.
In some fashion. It's fascinating to see.
McClunky.
McClunky.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, bringing it back to we are now returned to our regularly scheduled program already in progress.
Sorry.
No, please. This was the best tangent ever, and I'm so happy it happened. Murd, in issue 6, talking of Starjammers, like right after we get the Wookiees hanging from the tree, where I'm very glad that they didn't put them any more detailed than they are. We get on the very next page what, I thinking hideous beasties understands this tongue. That guy, if that isn't a Starjammer design, I don't know what is.
And apparently Trandosha is a region of France.
Oh. Fantastic.
Hey, Hoth was a German general in World War II, so, come on.
That's true.
He pulled from everywhere.
Oh, my God. But I am not a fan of this Wookiee design. I'm glad that they tweaked it for Rebels and made it work for one of the characters, but
For Zeb, yeah.
Yeah, this is not the Wookiee that I'm looking for. This is no.
Yeah, doesn't even really look that much like McQuarrie's design either.
No.
His is more of a bat-like face, almost like the old silent film Nosferatu, and this take is a little more ape-like, but it does have the big pointy ears and the giant staring eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a good job of turning it into Zeb for Rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really good panel in issue 7, which is an extreme close-up of Chewie staring right into Anakin's face.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yep. Well, they give you that hint of the partnership they're going to have in the future, just because the connection they forged is because they shared the language.
Well, and speaking of issue 7, I love the splash page of the Wookiees taking on the Stormtroopers. I could just look at that 2-page splash
when they attack the outpost.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a great. The art and the whole story, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The one part of issue 7 that I wish wasn't there was something that reminded me of the Star Wars Christmas special, which is the cutaway to the kids.
Ian, you mentioned it. I have to restrain myself now because we can now spend an hour talking about the glorious, majestic absurdity of the Star Wars Christmas special.
I did recently look up and watch that whole cartoon that introduced Boba Fett not long ago.
Oh yeah.
So for Star Joe's, I had seen this holiday special, and then I was telling my co-host about it, and he says, "Well, we should do it as a commentary for the show." And I said,
"A blind reaction for Chuck."
Yes. So I said to him, I was like, "No, we don't want to watch this." I said, "I'm telling you right now, it tricks you at the beginning because it looks awesome at the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you're in trouble." So Chuck had not seen it, and then we decided to do a audio commentary where we started watching it and we just commentated through the whole thing. And he still has never forgiven me for that.
Yes, for it.
Yeah, I that's what I point out to him. I'm like, I tried to warn you about this. And he says, "I will never forgive you." I'm like, I warned you. I said, if anything, we at least brought some entertainment to others that have to watch it because they can at least listen to us make fun of certain moments throughout it.
Yeah.
I know I watched it when it first aired on TV.
As did I.
I thought it was maybe a half hour long because I had not seen it since I was a kid. And then I got a hold of a copy, watched it, and it kept going and going. An hour goes by, an hour and a half. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible.
Yeah.
When's it going to stop?
I subjected it
We've
to
got
my
an idea for some
roommates.
CTS Christmas content now, I think.
Oh my God, yes. I subjected it to.
That is a good call, though, Ryan. That little scene with the thumper is kind of reminiscent of a Christmas special, the holiday special.
Yeah.
Oh
I have a
my
question
God.
because I forgot. in these last few issues, does Vader die, or we're not sure if he's dead or not?
He blows up.
He blows up, yeah.
He blows up with it.
Yeah, very unceremoniously and kind of just like out of nowhere.
Yep, that's what I like to call serial justice. Bad guy just abruptly and unceremoniously and ignobly dies. Okay, story's almost over. Bad guy has to die.
Yep.
Him and Governor Hodak,
Yeah.
who is, Tarkin.
And speaking of serials, of course, and then you have nothing more to worry about. Until then, ha-ha!
Yeah.
You know what's bad? When I kind of just want to just do like an audio drama reading of this entire damn thing. And
That could be quite entertaining.
Exactly.
Ryan, let's say this had been, as we get into the end here, if let's say this was the actual movie, how do you think they could have set up a sequel?
Well, obviously they were going to go to Ofuchi.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, the only thing that did pop in my mind, because I thought about, okay, if they're going to continue this, was that we still do have the Emperor out there. So, because
very underwhelming.
Because he completely disappeared. So he is still alive and well, and much like what we saw with Star Wars going into Empire, the Empire didn't disappear. They just had a very large victory against it, and the Empire was still a major threat. So I feel like the Emperor still being out there is kind of the direction that Lucas could have gone into.
Yeah.
And Shane, I thought you made a really good point. As I was imagining this as a film, I was thinking, okay, this is like Flash Gordon without the tongue-in-cheek humor.
Yeah.
And I think Ryan's Kroll point is also right on target here. I don't think it would have made the translation into movies very well for what we see here.
And if it did, it would be very much a B-grade sci-fi mystery science theater 3000 kind of thing.
Well, and like, I cannot understand for the life of me, to steal a wrestling term, the face turn of the Sith. That the fact that he goes, fight Jedi, fight against the forces of tyranny, and even the look on Anakin's face, that's how I felt, because
I think a little bit of it was what he was going for, and you see it a little bit in the panels before that, was he was being so belittled and berated by Vader, and even Vader said, once we're done with the Jedi, maybe the Sith will be next. So I think it was out of self-preservation, but it wasn't developed very well.
Yeah.
And like we said before, they killed his brother.
Right.
But just kind of got to move on.
But there again, so you have that where he tosses him the lightsaber. Here and now, fight Jedi, and the next page, you have them turn backs and fight with each other, much like you have Rey and Kylo do in The Last Jedi.
yes,
Yeah.
Not that it was intended for that by no stretch of the imagination, but
Sure.
I can see where it can make sense in this universe.
Yeah.
No, of course, and I mean, I think that if it were developed a little bit better, then it would have worked even better.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what do we all think about the ending of all this, especially with the whole "this fortress is invincible" explode?
Yeah. Well, it all ends really quick.
A nice little bow on top, or metal, as the case may be. So.
And that's okay. That's how Star Wars was. I mean, if it did well enough to just be on its own, it was a complete story. The good guys won, and that's it. So that part makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
It made me appreciate the final film. I revere it anyway, all the more when you see the process Lucas went through. From Ryan said he wrote this in 1973.
So 73 was the 10-pager, and then the 74 was the actual rough draft.
Right. So he's really struggling with the creative process of this for over a 4-year period, basically.
Yeah.
Again, I'm so glad you picked the Shane, because it just only further confirmed my love for the original film.
Yeah.
And some of this, like what Ryan's saying also, and what you have, Chris, I have a digital version of that making of Star Wars. It's an enhanced version that I have through, I think it's the Nook app. So through that, you'll get to a part where you're reading along with this making of book, and there'll be a sound clip or a video clip of something. Sometimes it's George Lucas, sometimes it's people in the special effects houses. It's a fascinating read. I'm only like 100 on the digital copy, like 100 pages into it. But it's a fascinating read for how he developed it and go through the
Making of Star
process.
Wars. That's a great book.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But one of my friends at one of my old jobs had said about how he got a hold of this enhanced digital copy, and it really is fun to look at and hear these sound bites and video clips all through it.
That's awesome.
Do any more comments? Do we want to rate?
Yeah. Anything else from the peanut gallery? Anything else we haven't mentioned yet?
I think I'm tapped out. I looked at my notes and yeah.
Murd, how about you?
Well, this is a comment that's coming a little bit out of left field here.
Please.
But I did want to say that one of my favorite scenes in this thing, you're going to think I'm defective here for this perhaps, but one of my favorite scenes is actually at the beginning of issue 4. It's when our merry little band of refugees is speeding their way through the desert toward the spaceport of Gordon, and Leia and her 2 little brothers are singing together.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
And my thought was, well, a couple of thoughts, actually. The first was, Star Wars needs more sing-alongs.
I think the holiday special kind of killed that, though.
Not for me, Shane. I'm one of those people who watches that thing repeatedly. Yeah, the B. Arthur bit in the canteen is my favorite.
Yeah, B. Arthur, Jefferson Starship.
The hologram of Jefferson Starship.
Yeah.
Yeah, slightly less tongue-in-cheek here, though. I wonder if maybe Lucas included that as a little Tolkien-esque touch.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit books, those are full of characters singing little folk songs or ballads. Since, you know, Tolkien was a folklorist and a philologist, he kind of appreciated stuff like that as lore. And then that might be Lucas's tip of the hat to him. But having thought about that, it made me wonder, you know, if this movie had been produced, you know, as it is, or as shown in this miniseries, you know, 3 or 4 years before it actually did find its way to theaters in its final form, how might the music have been different? Because, you know, just bearing in mind the trends in Hollywood from the late 60s through most of the 70s, non-diegetic music, and particularly like fully orchestrated full-scale scores, were kind of out of fashion. You know, and John Williams and his score for the Star Wars movie we actually got in 1977 did an awful lot to reverse that trend, I think we can say. So I'm just wondering if a 1974 version would have that much actual music. I'm sure there'd be some kind of action score to it, but in order for there to be a sing-along like this, a little scene where everybody's just easy riding through the desert singing, there would probably need to be quiet in the background. And the only music we'd hear is what the Leia and her brothers were singing. So that's just a neat little scene that set my mind wondering about all the a few other different things other ways in which this movie might have been different if it had been produced mid-70s as opposed to late 70s.
Clearly, it would have been a disco soundtrack because that's the only answer.
Yeah. Or I hear maybe a little bit of ABBA.
There you go.
Or think about the music in a film like Logan's Run, for example.
Yeah.
Good point, Chris. Yep. Yes, another great example of mid-decade science fiction.
I do stand corrected, by the way. I did find issue 0 on Marvel Unlimited.
Okay.
They just didn't put them in sequence, so when I would go from issue to issue, it didn't actually activate issue 0 until I was out of it, and that's why I didn't find it until now.
All right, should we do Freck and Swears?
Yeah, let's do it. And Ryan, since you're our guest, how about we start it off with you? How many Freck and Swears do you give it?
This is almost like a two-parter. If you are a diehard Star Wars fan, I think this is a must own. So I would say for a diehard Star Wars fan, as myself, I would give it a 3.5. But if you are just looking for a story, I'd probably give it a 2, just to enjoy the artwork.
Yeah, I would give it a 2 as well. I mean, I love it for the artwork and for what it is as an experiment and, you know, the history behind it and all that jazz. But I don't think I'd be able to give it more than a 2 just based on the story alone. But again, the artwork is absolutely gorgeous. Murd?
Well, like Ryan, I think I would bifurcate my score a bit. In terms of just personal enjoyment, I would actually give this a 4. I liked this. And I just, as I've said before, it's just a fun creative exercise. It was neat seeing all these really weird, colorful ideas that Lucas was spitting out there and trying to cram into too small a space, and to see what a crazy experience, reading this proto Star Wars was. I enjoyed reading through this, and Ryan has said he's going to read through it again. Probably, I probably will too.
Yeah,
but. Being slightly more objective, though, on the level of quality of storytelling, characterization, etc., it's probably, I'd give it more like a 3 or like a 2 3/4. And just for the record, I don't. If this movie had been made in 1974, I don't think it would have laid quite the egg you guys think it would have. It certainly wouldn't have sparked the phenomenon that the actual movies did. I think it would have achieved some popularity. It would have been an instant cult classic. It might even have had some influence on other filmmakers. It's maybe too much to hope that it would have made all of its money back, but yeah, I think it would have had an impact.
Okay.
I think I would definitely do what Ryan and Adam did, and I'd have to split it between, for historical perspective and your love of a deep fan of Star Wars, I definitely think it's a 4. I think it's worth owning and reading and putting it in perspective that you got to read and see something that led to what we so fondly love. And there are some good things in here, and like we've said, the artwork is fantastic. But like Adam and Ryan, I think if it's just on a story that you're thinking, oh, it's just another Star Wars story, it definitely 2.5, 2 3/4, maybe a low 3.
I'd give it a 2.5, and that's for the art and for the historical value of it. But I found the story itself. I was taken out of it on so many different points, and I found it very plotting. But again, historically, again, echoing what you fellas are saying, I think it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, and I hope that everybody listening does just that, whether it be digitally or otherwise.
Before we go, Ryan, I think you have a Kickstarter to promote.
Yes, I do. So thank you for mentioning that. And speaking of world building and a lot of plot development, I am venturing into comics. It's something I've always wanted to do. I love to create stories ever since I was a little kid. And there was my comic is called Stealth Hammer. It's inspired by my wife, who actually has that as a nickname from some past jobs that she has. She swooped in a couple places to win some clients over, so they called her Stealth. And then another place she was in charge of brand compliance, so she had to kind of lay the hammer down. She kind of blended those two names together, and we always joked that would make a great superhero name. So for one of her birthdays, I actually had her commissioned as the Stealth Hammer. We always talked about what her powers would be and stuff like that. Once I saw that drawing, I was immediately realized that this could actually be a thing. So as soon as I thought that, man, ideas just started flooding in my head, and I was doing research, and we went to Iceland last year for an amazing trip, and there was inspiration that came from that trip for this character and everything. So the short elevator pitch of it is that I'm going to read right from the Kickstarter just to make it easy. Is that Stealth Hammer is an all-ages comic that tells the story of Jamie Taylor, a teenage college student who finds herself part of a grand legacy of protectors in a world of high-tech gadgetry and supernatural mythology. To relate it to something people can identify with, I view it as like the current Miss Marvel in a world of Mega Man meets Thor. Huh. So I love mythology. And I love high-tech robots and gadgets and stuff like that. And this is blending all that together. This is really a love letter to all the things that I love in pop culture. I went through many edits myself, much like Mr. Lucas did. And there are little nods to things for Star Wars as well as other pop culture things. I do have a little impish character named Ari the Elf, who is kind of my Yoda character. In fact, there's a scene in a 5-page backup story that will be in the issue where Jamie is carrying Ari the Elf on her back in a backpack, very reminiscent of Star Wars. There's also a scene in the main story where her uncle realizes who Stealth Hammer is his niece, and he is the enemy, the main opponent in the first issue. And he says, when he realizes that, his niece says, Stealth Hammer says, "You'll find that I'm full of surprises." So a nice little nod to Luke's comment in Star Wars. So there's things like that are in there, but ultimately, it is an all ages comic that is true all ages. I wanted to write something that wasn't just geared towards kids, but truly something that anyone of any age could pick up and read and enjoy. I relate it to the Spider-Man comics that I know you guys love back from the 80s and 70s and 80s, where anyone of any age could really pick those up and enjoy them. The first issue is on Kickstarter right now. We're trying to get up to 8,500. We are currently over 56% of our goal just within the first few days. It goes until August 24th. We have some awesome rewards like commissioned sketches, behind the scenes art book that we're going to be creating, and you can even be a character in the issue. So some really fun things. We have digital copies and everything else, and it's available. It'll be available in Canada as well as the UK, as well as, of course, the United States. So yeah, anybody willing to check it out, we would love the support. We've kind of slowed up a little bit after the first couple of days of an amazing start. So would love to get to that goal. I have Joel Jackson, who is my artist. He is incredible. He does this awesome cartoony style, but a lot of detail to it. In fact, on the Kickstarter, you can see the very first page of the issue is Jamie sitting in her window seat in her room, and there is a lot of nods to things that we have planned for Stealth Hammer in future issues that are in that one scene. This issue is a one-and-done story with a lot of nods to where we want to go with it. This was not an issue taken lightly. This is about 2 years in the making for myself when it comes to the script. We also have some amazing talent working after Joel. We have Ross Hughes, who has done many things coloring-wise for DC Comics, as well as some independent comics. And then we have Dave Sharp, who does lettering for a lot of Marvel and DC. He's going to do the lettering for us. So I have some amazing professionals. I have Robert Atkins doing a variant cover for it. And Shannon Gallant, who's done G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero for a very long time with Larry Hama, he's going to do a pinup in it. So I am very blessed as being such a green new writer to have so many amazing people around me helping me and working with me. I had someone that works in editing actually edit my script to make sure it could be as tight as possible. And so I am, like I said, very blessed, and I would appreciate anyone going and checking it out. Like I said, Stealth Hammer, it's on Kickstarter. It's good till August 24th. And I'd appreciate any support that anyone can do. And if you can't support it, I understand times are tough right now. But at the very least, if you could share it with other people that may be interested, I would appreciate that.
All right. Good luck, sir.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah, the fact that a digital copy is only $5, you just got me.
Yes, we wanted to make it affordable. It is a 28-page issue, so 22 pages of a main story and 5 pages of a backup story. Plus, there'll be a few pinups that will be showing future potential stories of the character. We wanted to make something affordable for people. And so, $5 seemed like something good for a digital copy there for people.
All right. Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us tonight, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am very honored to be here. I know I've been on a episode to call in one time, and I think and that was so much fun and thrilling for me. This was an absolute pleasure to close out with the last pedigree of my Star Wars background. I know sometimes you guys ask, like, what was your first introduction to comics and things like that. My first comic was actually, I got a 3-pack at a toy store.
Oh, the 3-packs.
Yes, I love the 3-packs. And the only comic I remember being in there, very appropriate for this episode, was the first issue of Return of the Jedi with a cover with Luke and Lando and Leia on the cover there. And I devoured that and poured over that so many times. And that is my favorite part of all of Star Wars, is the whole Jabba stuff at the beginning, the first 20 minutes, Return of the Jedi. So.
Bird, there you go.
I am right there with you, Ryan.
Oh, I know.
That first 20 minutes above Empire, actually.
Yes. Yeah. So that's my first foray into comics was that issue, and I absolutely adored it. So
awesome. And also before you're entirely gone, let people know where they can find your podcast.
Yes. So you can find us at starjoes.com. We, of course, have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But starjoes.com is the easiest way to find it. And we're, of course, on all the major platforms where you can find podcasts. So
Fantastic.
Cool.
Well, so your expertise was invaluable here this episode. Thank you so much.
Okie dokie. All right, and on that note, I believe it is time to wrap this sucker up.
Shot our bolt.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Shane, over to you.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send us an email. Send us an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com and let us know what you think of the Star Wars and all of your Star Wars experiences. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and go through the Facebook group as well. We'd like to thank everyone who contributes to the episodes. We appreciate it. Ryan, thanks again for coming onto the episode. It was a lot of fun having you and discussing Star Wars with you. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.